Barker was born into the 5th generation of a storied South Texas ranching family. She was put on a horse before she could walk because in the world of ranching and brush country, that was the safest place for a youngster. The great-granddaughter of Rocky Reagan, the granddaughter of Bob Reagan, and the daughter of Jenny Bess Reagan, it's fair to say she had some big boots to fill. Lee grew up riding drag, waiting for the day when she was the last one dropped off to sweep the pasture, because if you were the last one left, that meant you got to ride with great-granddaddy, the man many know as Mr. Rocky. After 28 years of being an educator and a coach, Leanne decided she wanted to pursue her calling and became her journey as a preacher. Her background in ranching goes beyond coming up in a family of ranchers. Regardless what her life pursuit has been, she's made sure to always have at least a handful of cattle to run on pastures that have handed down through generations. And I present to you Leanne Dye Barker.
Thank you. You're welcome. I want to start by saying it's an honor and a privilege to be here. That was an amazing piece that Margaret shared, and I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to tell a story that's found in one of J. Frank Dobie's books, and I'm going to share this story because my great-grandfather, Mr. Rocky, shared it with him, and as the story unfolds, the story is about the ranch on the Nueces River. And on the front of the book that it's found in, it says the tale belongs to the person who tells it best. So I'm hoping tonight I'm the one that tells it best. And I hope I do them proud. But the story starts with him explaining that him and my great-grandfather, Mr. Dobie, and him were sitting around, and he said we were sitting there and you could hear the south wind blowing through the trees and the screech of an owl down in the river bottom, and you could hear a lone coyote howl out in the brush. And I could just imagine being there to hear them sharing and swapping stories, and they gave me a time limit, and I'm pretty sure never was a time limit put on my great-grandfather or Mr. Dobie, either one. But I'm going to try to mind it because I heard they're going to rope me if I don't. She says she can. That came from the back. But this story starts out in Alabama. A gentleman named Elijah Ray had a business with a partner named Hess. Now, my great-grandfather tells that Hess, by nature, was kind of a bull-billed fella with a real red face, and he stood out amongst other men. And him and Mr. Ray had a business in Alabama, and they had a store and some farms and stuff. And over the course of time, Mr. Ray had come to Texas and looking for a better way, and interested in the opportunities that lay in Texas, in being a rancher and buying land and trading cattle. Words of the big cattle drives had spread, and he was interested, but he went home, and as life would have it, that wasn't in the cards for him. The Civil War came, and as that came, business wasn't doing too good. It was a little rough on the store, and he and Hess kind of struggled with that business. But what happened was, after the war, a Yankee came down to Alabama, and he offered to buy that store from Mr. Ray and from old Hess. And Hess, he was kind of not always on the up and up. He was a little bit of a character and a little bit shady and not always truthful. So when this Yankee came in, Mr. Ray found it as a time that he could split with Hess and sell out his part and not worry about what Hess was doing, doctoring books or maybe swiping a little money here or there. And so they sold out. They sold out and they went about their way. But during that time, Mr. Ray had two sons, Jim and Wallace. Now, Jim and Wallace were 18 and 20 years old. And Elijah Ray and his wife talked it over, and they were like, we're never going to get to Texas. But there is land waiting to be homestead. There's cattle to sell and trade. There's something there for our boys. And they had grown up on the stories that their dad shared about coming to Texas in the 1840s, and now we're in the 1860s. So what they decided was they were going to give the boys each $5,000 in gold coins. That's a lot of money. Because boys were going to take off to Texas one way or the other, and they wanted to prepare them for that trip. The problem was they were still settling the bank accounts, and the bull-bodied, red-faced Hess knew about these plans. All of a sudden, Hess disappears. Now, at the time, they didn't think anything about it. I don't know if I would have been the Ray family. Maybe they thought good riddance. So the Ray family had some money belts made. They put that $5,000 of gold coins in those money belts for those boys. Jim and Wallace went and bought, as my great-grandfather said, and Mr. Dobie put in his book, sturdy clothes. I guess coming to Texas, they thought sturdy clothes was important. And they got their supplies. They got a 6-shooter. They got an Alabama long rifle. And they were ready to go. Their mother put a Bible in each one of their bags. And they sent them down on a steamboat to New Orleans. They hit New Orleans, ready to get on another boat, and ended up in Indianola, Texas. Ready to find some horses and get saddles and get ready and head west of the Nueces, where their father had said there's belly-deep grass and land up for grabs and a future for you boys to build on your own. So while in Indianola, they decided they needed 2 good horses. So Jim, he picked out a line-back dun. And Wallace got him a Gruya horse, kind of a slate gray kind of horse. And while they were trading for these horses and getting saddles, they realized those long rifles weren't much use, so they swapped those in for some saddle guns and scabbards. And in all this trading and buying supplies, they kept hearing stories of this fella that had come through town weeks before. Bull-billed fella. Little red-faced fella with mannerisms and actions that reminded him of old Hess. But those Ray boys were so excited to get over here west of the Nueces and claim some land and start their ranches and build houses and have homesteads, they just let it go in one ear and out the other. They found a morale. I don't know if y'all know what a morale is, but it's a woven bag that was used on every saddle horn. And in that morale, they put their little coffee pot and their tin cup and some coffee and sugar, put some cartridges in there for those saddle guns. Everything they needed set on that saddle horn and hung in that morale. And they bought them a blanket, like we would call a poncho, right? They didn't have slickers. They had a satil blanket, had a hole slit in the middle. That way they could put it over their head in the rain and it'd run water off. They could lay it on the ground for a pallet. They could roll their clothes up in it and put it on the back of their saddle. And they were set. They hooked up with a wagon train headed from Indianola to San Antonio, Texas, via Beeville. Right down the road. Right over there. And they get to Beeville, and they're like, this has been a nice ride, kind of slow for 2 young men, but saw a lot of wildlife and things that just perked their interest to be in Texas. But they were ready to get west to the Nueces. They were ready to stake their claim. So when they got to Beeville, they got some more soda crackers and some more bacon, and they discussed that they could kill meat on the way, and they split. They split with the wagon train, and they headed west of the Nueces, right through where you're sitting tonight. They were going to cross the Nueces at what is known as the Puerto Pedra, which is right over here. Literally, if we had time, we could all hike over there. Used to take my kids on field trips all the time. But they crossed there and they camped there, and they had these big dreams, and they were like, well, we'll sleep when we get on the other side of the Nueces. And they crossed over there, they rested up, and they got on their horses the next morning and took off in search for all the things that their dad had explained and looking for cattle. And along the way, they didn't see one human being. They saw some Spanish cattle. They're wilder than deer, they said. They found some semi-domesticated cattle. They found lots of deer and turkeys, quail, and no humans, and they were excited. And as they rode along and talked and dreamed together, all of a sudden, out of the brush came 18 men running, whipping and going and firing and yelling at them. They didn't know what to do, but they knew they can't stand and fight. The odds were too big, 18-2. So they whipped and spurred and took off as fast as they could, being chased by those men, shots firing. They turned around with their stick shooter to shoot back. And they noticed it was a band of Indians chasing them. The problem was there was one fellow that didn't look like the rest of them. Had a red bandana around his head. He was a bull build and a little red-faced. Could it be Hess? They ran like nothing horseback. As another shot rang out, and Jim saw the corner of his eye when Wallace's Gruya horse went to the ground dead, trapping Wallace under him, and Jim pulls up and jumps off to save his brother, to find that not only was the horse dead, but so was his brother, shot through the lungs. He jumped back on his horse. He took off as fast as he could, knew he couldn't stand alone, only for his line back done to step in a soggy gopher hole and go head over end. Jim was able to clear the saddle and clear the horse. The horse jumps up, runs one direction, and Jim, thinking quick, says, "I gotta go the other way." He took off opposite of his horse. He ran up into a gully and hid in some brush as the Indians and the bull-bodied, red-faced Hess blew by him. He laid up in that gully for a while, and all he could think about was, I've got my six-shooter and one unspent round, and I've got a money belt. Got a money belt with $5,000 that's not going to do me a darn bit of good. Not in this situation. So he laid there and he could only think about getting back to his brother. So he waited for things to quiet down, and he could hear the voices where they had set up camp by the river. So he worked the next morning early, about daybreak, and he wanted to get back to his brother. And he worked through the grass and through cover to get back to Wallace. And he got there and he was so relieved that the Indians had not messed with his brother's body. They'd taken a few clothes and the money belt. Now he knew his dad and other people he had talked to said that those Indians weren't after those gold coins. It only made him wonder more if the man he saw really was Hess. So he put his mind to it with that one unspent cartridge, that he was going to ambush them and let them know he was still alive. So as he watched the Indians, and they couldn't see him, and watched Hess, they were at the bank of the river, and it was a bluff on this side, and they needed to get to the other side, and it was a big embankment, and the river was swimming deep, running hard. And those Indians were trying to jump their horses off, and some would go and some wouldn't. They blindfolded some horses and backed them off the ledge. But they got them in the water, some hanging on the tails, swimming across. And Jim waited till every one of them was starting up that embankment. He pulled his six-shooter, he stood up, and he looked right at Hess, and he squeezed that one round off. And he missed. He didn't care. He threw his arms up and he said, "I'm here." He wanted Hess to know that he knew who killed his brother and who started this mess. Well, can you imagine the chaos that ensued? They had Indians and Hess jumping back in the water without their horses, trying to swim the raging river back to where Jim was. Jim takes cover and starts running upriver, smart, jumps in the river, swims across, runs back down, and finds the line back done. With his saddle rifle still there, his morale still on the saddle horn, he shoos all the other horses away, and he takes off on a dead run for about 2 miles. All all the clamoring and commotion. He goes about 2 miles where the slough is kind of wide, and he drops off in the slough and he rides so he doesn't leave any tracks, and he finds a gully to go up in and hide again. And he lays there and he waits till morning. Everything's calm again. They haven't found him. They couldn't track him. He had been in that slough. So the next morning he finds a little patch of grass, takes his horse there, and he goes back and he hides all day. That night, he goes out and he beds down in that grass so his horse can eat good at night so nobody can see him. And he plans. And the plan was to give his brother a proper burial. He couldn't think about moving cattle. He couldn't think about buying land. He had to take care of Wallace. He needed to take care of him first. So he goes over, he goes back all the way back to where Wallace's body was. And he takes his own shirt off and he wraps it around Wallace's head, and he drags Wallace up into one of the creeks, and he pulls out his pocket knife and he starts chipping away at the bank and covering Wallace's body to bury him the best he could. He got him buried. The whole time he was working that day, he noticed some buzzards sitting in a tree down by the river where the mouth of that creek, that gully, emptied into the river. So curiosity got the best of him. He walked down there, and under the driftwood, he saw this little patch of red. And he looked down, and as he looked at that red, he kicked away some of the driftwood that was there. And the more he moved, that red became a red bandana, still wrapped around the bull-bodied red face, Hess. He dug only far enough to find the money belt strapped on Hess that had belonged to his brother. He pulled that off of Hess, and he left Hess for the buzzards to feast on. Now what to do? Not a whole lot to think about. Missing your brother, few supplies, in Texas, a long way from home. And he thought, this river is running, and it's running big. And if I can get down the river, I can find people, and I can get more supplies, and I can find out what the lay of the land is better. Now, you see, he was an Alabama boy, considered a greenhorn here in Texas. Leaving his horse behind and building a raft was probably not the smartest thing he did. But according to the story that my great-grandfather told Mr. Dobie, that's just what he did. He hobbled his horse, he hid the money belts, and he built a makeshift raft with a rope, and he took his saddle gun and tied it to one of the logs and took off down the river looking for people, looking for supplies. And he made it about 2 hours down the river until the river made a sharp bend, and when it did, his raft smashed right into the side of the bank and just went to pieces. The saddle gun is probably still in the bottom of the Nueces right now. He had nothing. He grabbed a hold of a limb on the side of the bank, and he pulled himself up the bluff, and he just rolled over and tried to catch his breath. What have I gotten into in Texas? And as he caught his breath and he looked up, he saw what his father had told him about all those years ago. The belly-deep green grass, the beauty of Texas along the Nueces. And he saw the deer out in the grass, and he was like, it's gonna be okay. And all of a sudden the deer ran and they flushed, and coming across the grassland was a man horseback riding along, and he could tell by the way he was riding he wasn't an Indian, so he stepped up and let himself be known. The gentleman came up rather kindly, pulled his gun on him at 200 yards, asked him what his business was. When he found out that Jim wasn't there to cause no harm but needed some help, he took old Jim and he put him on horseback with him, and he took him back to his place, about 5 miles, because he'd been out looking for some missing horses. Took him back to his house, he fed him, let him rest for a couple of days, And then he loaned Jim a horse, a saddle, and they rode back to the line back dun and the money belts. And along their journey, this old fella helped Jim figure out what land wasn't taken, how he could go about homesteading that area, that place that he had saved himself by pulling up on the bank, pulling up on the bluff, nobody owned. That's where he was going to stake his claim. So he got his money belts and he got into town and he did what he needed to do. He hired a few hands. He started getting some cattle and they built a house on that bluff where he had pulled himself up out of the water. Now, everything was going pretty good for Jim. He had a line back done that was good as gold. He had hands he trusted. He had a house on the bluff above the Nueces, and he had grass that went on forever. But he hadn't been home in 2 years. So he told the hands to watch things. He left the line back done there, and he took off back to Alabama because he had left his sweetheart there. Guess what? He hadn't written home in 2 years. Sweetheart had moved on. He was alone in Alabama, but he knew the line back done, his trusted hands, and the house on the bluff of the Nueces River were waiting for him. So he gathered up some things and came back to Texas. And that's how the Ray Ranch started, with a story of 2 young men looking for their fame and fortune and following their dreams. And over 100 years later, there was a pig-tailed little girl on a line back dun named Buck that ran that same river, went through those same gullies, chased cattle through that same brush, and dreamed big dreams too. Thank you.
Mr. Rocky and Mr. Dobie are very proud of you. What do y'all think? Okay, so I've got a couple of questions for Leanne too. And those of you who aren't from this area, you probably have never heard of the Ray Ranch. So I'm just going to ask her to tell us just a little bit about the significance to the Ray Ranch to this area.
So the Ray Ranch in particular, my great-grandfather and the grandfather and great-great-grandfather to some of you out there, my family that's here, the Ray Ranch was home. You always wanted to get back to the Ray Ranch. And the significance, for me anyway, growing up, is that's where I learned how to live life, love God, take care of the country, take care of the land, take care of your horses, take care of your cattle. It instilled a sense of pride, hard work, and all the things that are good in life. It wasn't easy for the Rays. They started a legacy. My great-grandfather, from what I've been told, had a 99-year lease on that place at one time, and my grandfather and my dad and my uncle at one time had at least. All of my family and I grew up out there hunting and just roaming the river, you know, and that house on the bluff, I might not have it 100% right, but according to my grandfather, whenever I'd find something down by the river when we were working cattle in the old wood pens there when I was a little kid, like 3rd grade, and we won't talk about how long ago that was, but he would say, oh yeah, that was the house that fell in the river, the house that fell off the bluff, the house that my great-grandfather and Mr. Dobie talked about, the homestead for the Rays. So the significance it goes deep for our family.
So why do you think Dobie chose this particular story of Mr. Rocky's to include in this book?
I think he included it because it did more than just tell a story of a family. It told a story of what a lot of the people went through to create the ranches. It's the tenacity and the hard work and the spirit of those that came to Texas to start ranches. I mean, it wasn't easy, but it created a heritage that runs deep, and I think Mr. Dobie and Great Daddy had a mutual respect when it came to that stuff, and he knew it was important to my great-grandfather, and it was important to the history of our state to know what kind of people came and founded these ranches that have gone on for years.
Yeah, I think that's cool, yeah. So one other question. So we've established that Mr. Rocky was a master storyteller. What was it like growing up listening to him tell stories?
Listening to Great Daddy tell a story was like you were drawn in, and he never got loud. Like I get loud. He didn't ever get loud. He was calm and gentle and easy spoken, and he would draw you in. And when I was little, we would stop by their house, and you would sit at the foot of his chair in the evenings, and he would start telling a story, and you would find yourself just leaning in closer and closer and closer and not even wiggling. And I was at the age that I should have been wiggling, but he had you drawn into what he was telling you. And then having the opportunity to work cattle with him, and that was very true. I cherish the days that I got to work cattle with him, even though I wasn't very old, because you would be doing something and you would break for lunch, and sometime we would eat out of the chuck box under a mesquite tree. Sometimes we would go back in to the ranch house to eat, but he would have a story to tell at some point in those times, and everybody would just kind of pause and listen, because he drew you in with the way he told it. You wanted to listen and hear what was next.
And we, those of us who have read his stories in Dobie, understand that Dobie loved a good storyteller, mm-hmm. and he gravitated to them. So mm-hmm. so we're fortunate that he did that. But also he encouraged Mr. Rocky to publish.
Yes, he had 3 books,
mm-hmm. and he had I remember when I was growing up, he had a weekly column in the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I share this. I'm kind of on the end. He passed away between my 2nd and 3rd grade, or in that time when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade. And I feel very honored because the fact that his stories are in Dobie, that carries on his stories. The Naylor Publishing had a fire, and a lot of those plates were lost of his stories. But one of my greatest possessions is one of my great-grandfather's books that he signed to Leanne.
Oh, that's cool.
And that's just a very personal thing, because he was such a master storyteller.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Leanne.